We are here with Jessica Santana. Jessica, can you describe your research focus in just a couple of sentences?
Sure. Well, I focus on entrepreneurial failure. So how entrepreneurs learn from and recover from failure. And specifically, I look at how entrepreneurs use social networks to do that, to recover and learn and move on from failure.
What motivated you to tackle the subject, and how did you get into this field, and why do you stay in it?
Yeah, it was a pretty unconventional route to get into this field. So I started out as an entrepreneur, as a student at Berkeley. And while I was working full time and working on my, as a consultant and working on my startup on the side, I was learning more and more about the field of network theory and academic research on entrepreneurship and became fascinated by it. So I was reading a lot of work from Karen Cook, Woody Powell, Mark Granovetter on how people use networks to gain an advantage or to miss out on those advantages. And met with those people and came into the field after some time in industry.
What can students expect to learn in a class with you that isn't necessarily on the curriculum?
Sure. Well, I would say the big takeaway from my entrepreneurship courses is that anyone can learn to be a good entrepreneur. It's not a psychological trait. It's not something you're born with. It's a muscle you can flex, you can develop. It's a skill that you can practice and improve.
That's very cool to think of entrepreneurship as a muscle. I think that's very encouraging. What popular entrepreneurial advice do you disagree with?
Well, definitely that people are born entrepreneurs. That's a popular piece of advice and popular theory academically as well. But the skills that tend to be assumed as innate or born traits, like risk-taking, measured risk-taking, vision, creativity, leadership, being able to manage projects, these are skills that you can develop. You're not necessarily born a great project manager.
Can you give me an example where failure and success have affected you as a person?
Well, I've experienced both as an entrepreneur, both failure and success. So as I mentioned, I study entrepreneurial failure, partly because I think it's an aspect of the field that is the most common experience among entrepreneurs, and it's not talked about very often. Success cases are highlighted most as well in research as well as popularly. So experiencing failure and success that kept me going as an entrepreneur is part of why I study what I study. So not getting a big round of funding, for example, that those sorts of failures that can shut down your organization, your venture, that can be toxic. It can really be harmful. And for success, also, I think for ambitious people, we tend to not linger on success. It feels fleeting. We move on quickly to the next thing. But it's important to acknowledge success as much as failure. So when you're hiring people, when you have people buy your product, those moments of affirmation are really important to keep you going.
Thank you. Maybe to dig a little deeper into failure, since we're on that topic, how do you view failure as it relates to innovation? And when is it, expected to be part of the process, and when is it unacceptable?
That's a great question. I love that question. Failure is a constant companion in entrepreneurship and innovation. It's a constant part of it. It's unavoidable, but it is manageable. There's a lot of literature on how to learn from failure. So we talk a lot about avoiding failure, ways to avoid it. There's quite a bit on how we can learn from the experience as well, and how we can maximize micro failures and minimize catastrophic failures. But there is a cost to failure. So it's important, going back to the earlier question, just embracing failure for the sake of failure is a mistake as well. There's a cost to it. There's a financial cost, there's a social cost, a serious social cost, psychological costs. There have been entrepreneurs lost who have committed suicide as a result of failure. So there are serious costs to it. And the way that you can deal with this is by developing a network of peers, a network of a support network who can help you get through it. You can also preempt failure by thinking strategically about how you're going to deal with it. So there's this tool called a pre-mortem, similar to a post-mortem, but you think about it preemptively at the beginning of the project to imagine that you would fail. So a hypothetical scenario, imagine you failed. What do you think caused the failure, and how can you prevent that? How can you change that outcome? So those sorts of reflective exercises are really valuable. And then also using data, using hypothesis testing to reduce the likelihood and the impact of failure. So data-driven entrepreneurship is really important for failing in the right way.
Got it. Could you describe to me the most exciting or the scariest minute of your experience as an entrepreneur?
Well, being on stage is definitely both exciting and scary. Whether it's being on stage at a big event in front of a huge, a packed auditorium, or standing in front of a potential investor who's considering investing hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars in your idea. That's really exciting and scary in a good way. So when I pitched to investors, when I pitched to Founder Institute, those sorts of organizations, it was really exciting. There's extra pressure being a female entrepreneur that was really challenging to deal with. So in addition to the standard stage fright and the butterflies that anyone gets standing in front of an audience, you're also dealing with low expectations, with low interest and other biases that you face as a female entrepreneur. And so you're cognitively having to deal with that in addition to the anxiety of the presentation, of the pitch. So those are the kind of emotions that have to drive you if you want to persist in that profession.
What mindsets, qualities, or talents have you found to characterize top innovators that you most admire, and how does one cultivate those attributes?
Resilience definitely is one. So the ability to bounce back from failure and keep going. So persistence, following resilience, but also gathering new knowledge from that experience and adapting. So learning from it, not just repeating the same mistakes. So being adaptive is a second critical mindset for an entrepreneur. So not getting stuck in a strategy or a vision just for the sake of it. Being willing to learn, being open to new ways of thinking about it. And also knowing your own strength and the value that you bring. So knowing when to stand your ground and when to be persuaded to think otherwise. So being resilient, being adaptive, I would say, gets you really far.
Resilient and adapted. Well, thank you so much, Jessica, for answering our questions, and thanks for your advice.
Thank you,
My
Jessica.
pleasure. Thank you.